The police response in the first 48 hours following the Christchurch mosque attacks has been deemed excellent, but a new report still makes more than 75 recommendations for improvements. The release of the independent review follows the Royal Commission's report yesterday into the mass shootings that killed 51 people. Operation Deans, the official debrief of the police response, applauds the exemplary leadership shown by Canterbury and Police National Headquarters, pointing to the arrest of the murderer within 20 minutes of the first shots being fired. The country's top cop at the time, Mike Bush, gave a statement on the attacks at 5:29 p.m. on March 15th.
We are currently dealing with an unprecedented situation in New Zealand. It's very grave, it's very serious. We have dealt with an active shooter situation. We have multiple fatalities. At this point, I can't say how many, but it is significant. They occurred in two locations, two mosques in Christchurch, one at Deans Avenue and one at Linwood Avenue. Our police have those locations locked down. We have 4 people in custody. We are pouring resources into that area. Every available Canterbury and staff member and people nearby, other emergency services also, saturating that area with visibility to ensure that everyone who needs to get home can get so safely. As you can imagine, this is requiring every police and emergency resource that we have available. We have Defence Force aircraft here in Wellington ready to fly more resources into the area. We'll do that from other locations nearby as well. So I want to assure the public we are doing everything we can to make sure there is no more harm to their communities.
And that was Mike Bush, the police commissioner at the time, speaking on the day of the shootings. Today's report also highlights areas that need work. There weren't enough family liaison officers to help after the shootings. The 111 system doesn't routinely accept texts, which is critical for victims who are in hiding. Poor communication around victim identification and the release of bodies to whanau escalated tensions. There were delays recognising police staff were traumatised after seeing the live video feed of the mass killings. And local police commanders were unaware of an advanced sniper training exercise in Christchurch on the day of the attacks. And some specialised staff involved in that were armed and deployed themselves to the incident, but were not carrying recognisable ID. Well, joining me now is Police Commissioner Andy Costa. Commissioner, how much of the success and the speed of containment with this event was down to good luck and having that training exercise in the city at the time?
Look, I'm incredibly proud of the response and the bravery of our people in what was a horrific event for our country. There were things that went in our favour on the day, but the rounded view of this report is that the response was outstanding and that was down to good management in the round.
So you had, specialist officers on a training course, some of them from overseas, some of them were armed, they deployed themselves to the incident, they didn't have ID. What was the danger there?
Look, obviously this was a very fast unfolding situation and a huge number of calls received about what was happening. So early on, difficult for people to get a clear picture. We had these officers available to deploy, and obviously they did what anyone would do in that situation, which is try to make a difference. Clearly, officers not identified creates the potential for confusion, and there was some confusion. Fortunately, in this case, there was no bad outcome from that.
But potentially someone could have been shot or injured, couldn't they? Because the public were told there were potentially multiple shooters. You had people who were armed, they weren't uniformed, and they weren't clearly identifiable. And I know they were doing their best, but that created, a serious potential risk there, didn't it?
Look, there was certainly potential for confusion, and our people are well trained to deal with situations. They don't fire randomly on people. They make good judgments. That's what happened in this case, and nothing untoward occurred. Obviously, we need to make sure that people who are deploying are well identified in connection with police, and that was a key learning from this situation.
Or even just tell commanders in the city that there is a big exercise like this underway in their town jurisdiction.
Yeah, look, absolutely. That was a key learning and one that's been well noted.
There is a recommendation for better access to tactical and response equipment. What gear are we talking about here?
We had a large number of staff able to deploy and provide response on the ground, and what we found is that access to firearms and other tactical equipment that they would normally take in that situation, we were at full capacity. That was partly a reflection of having a large number of people ready and available to respond. There was no suggestion here that had our normal number of people been available, we would have had an issue. But we are looking at whether we need to increase the availability of tactical equipment, including things like ballistic armour and so on.
And more guns?
Well, I would be surprised if more firearms were required. We have done a scan subsequent to March the 15th and assessed that by and large the equipment around the districts is acceptable level.
There was some confusion with 111 calls coming in with outdated information and it making it difficult to know what was happening right at that point in time. Would a drone have helped you with that?
Certainly having air support as we do in Auckland, which is in the form of a police helicopter, makes a big difference to being able to understand what's happening on the ground. Practically providing that kind of support across the whole country is a challenge. It's a very expensive resource. These situations.
But does Christchurch need that full-time helicopter for police?
We did trial a full-time helicopter in Christchurch, and clearly that makes a really big difference where it's available. Putting that kind of service across every city in New Zealand would be a huge cost. So, we need to think about that and whether there's a justification to explore options, but we recognise there are a range of challenges as well.
Do you believe there is a justification for a city like Christchurch to have a full-time police helicopter?
We haven't at this point reached that view. If we were to put something like that in Christchurch, we would need to think about Wellington and Tauranga and no doubt other places. Like anything, we have to weigh up the cost over the benefit.
What are you going to do to enable routine texting to the 111 line? Because victims who don't want to make a noise, if they're hiding, they can't make voice calls. When will you address that?
Yeah, look, that's a really important opportunity identified in this review, and we are actively exploring what it would look like to provide a text service. Clearly there are a range of complexities with that, including the ability to validate that information being texted to us is genuine and being able to ask the kind of questions of clarification that would be helpful. But we are exploring it. The overseas experiences on this front will be informative, and it's...
So what's the timeline for deciding?
Look, I don't have a timeline for that at this stage. It's part of a broader set of service delivery improvements that we need to think about, but it's definitely an area of interest for these rare but desperate situations that can occur.
There was a lot of anger and upset at the time around the release of bodies and confusion over victim identification, misinformation. I mean, what is the single biggest improvement that you could make there?
This was a huge event, and it's hard to explain the chaos at the scene, which needed to be carefully managed, not just to ensure correct victim identification, but to ensure that we preserved evidence for the criminal prosecution. So it doesn't get much more complicated than this for disaster victim identification. There are a bunch of recommendations there that we will work through. The key one, I think, is making sure that we right-size the approach to victim identification according to the circumstances and engaging early with the coroner to make sure that we're on the same page about what's necessary in the situation.
And having enough fully trained family liaison officers to communicate information presumably would have helped too. You asked for 40, but only had 9 available.
Yeah, look, that was absolutely a gap there, and with the added complexity in this case of different cultural expectations around these processes. Our people did an outstanding job in those circumstances, but we recognise that we've actually got some work to do in that area, which is well underway.
So in terms of cultural awareness, I mean, how many of your senior officers would be from the Muslim community?
We have fairly limited representation at our senior levels in terms of ethnic communities, and that's something that we're absolutely focused on.
So are you going to have a quota?
Look, I think quota is probably not the right language here. We need to make sure that to the best extent possible, our leadership is representative of the communities that we police. We have moved massively in recent years on this, but we have work to do to ensure that people from a range of diverse backgrounds are able to progress through the ranks and provide that kind of leadership.
Also identified that perhaps you underestimated the trauma that would be and was experienced by your own people from the live stream of the killings. I mean, how many people or how many claims for mental distress or sick leave have there been related to this?
I don't have that number in front of me, but it was incredibly...
Are you tracking that information though, Commissioner?
Yes, look, we had a very substantial welfare work stream sitting right across this operation. In fact, it was one of the strong points of what we did, but it was incredibly distressing for our people to see the live stream, understandably. Some needed to as an essential part of their roles. Others, there was opportunity maybe to protect them from it, and that's a key learning. We did, though, stand up a huge amount of support, and we do have the data about how many people received counselling and the like, and it was a large number.
And are some of your staff still getting help in that area?
I'm sure that there are some who are still grappling with the effects of this. What people discuss with counsellors is obviously kept fairly confidential, but we are still supporting a range of people, in connection with this event.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That's the Police Commissioner there, Andrew Costa.